Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The air was heavy with smoke, the scent of scorched earth hanging thick in the breeze as Lila stood on the edge of the burning city. Flames roared through the streets, devouring buildings in their wake, and yet she remained unfazed. The fire that others feared was like a second skin to her, familiar and warm. It danced at her fingertips, beckoning her to command it, but for once she hesitated. Lila, a voice called from behind her, and she turned to see a group of civilians fleeing the inferno. Their fear was palpable, and Lila knew that she should take control of the fire and save the city. But something was wrong. The flames were too wild, too unpredictable, even for her. She clenched her fists, feeling the heat radiate from her core, but it wasn't enough. The flames lashed out, tearing through the streets faster than she could rein them in. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, rushing toward her. His long cloak billowed in the hot wind, and the glint of a staff caught the sunlight. "Lila, you must come with me now," the elder said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "There's no time to explain, but the fate of this city and the world depends on it." Lila hesitated, glancing back at the blazing streets. Her instinct was to stay, to fight the fire with everything she had. But the look in the elder's eyes stopped her. Something far worse was happening, and it was beyond her power to handle alone. With a reluctant nod, she followed him, leaving the city behind. Far to the north, in a small coastal village, Noah stood at the edge of the cliffs, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The ocean had always been his solace, its rhythmic pull calming the storm that often raged inside him. But today the sea was anything but calm. The waters churned violently, the tides rising higher than he had ever seen. A storm was brewing, one not born of nature but of something darker. His fingers traced the surface of the water as it lapped at his feet, trying to understand the disturbance. "Are you going to do something or just stand there?" a voice said behind him. Noah turned to see a familiar figure, her wind-blown hair and bright eyes marking her as Erin, the wind mage who often visited these parts. "I am trying," Noah muttered, his brow furrowed as he concentrated, but the storm wouldn't bend to his will. It was like trying to control a force that had no origin. "Something saw you not right," Erin said, her voice quieter now as she joined him at the water's edge. "The winds have been strange too, at lengths like their anger." Noah glanced at her, seeing the worry in her usually carefree expression. Erin wasn't one to be easily rattled, but if even she was feeling the shift in the elements, something serious was happening. Before he could respond, a figure approached them from the cliff. It was the elder, his cloak fluttering in the wind. Noah straightened, already knowing that this wasn't Tyan's social visit. "Noah, Erin, you were needed," the elder said, his voice carrying above the crashing wave. "The balance of the elements is crumbling. If we don't act soon, the world as we know it will be lost." They traveled quickly, the elder leading the way as they made their way to the mountains where Gray, the earth mage, lived. The journey was tense, with no one speaking much, each of them lost in their thought. Lila was still grappling with the uncontrollable fire she had left behind, while Noah wrestled with the strange tide. Erin kept her usual lightness about her, but her eyes betrayed the uncertainty she felt. Only Gray, when they found him, seemed at peace. He stood alone at the edge of a cliff, watching the landslide below with a calm expression. The ground shifted and trembled, but he remained steady as though he were part of the earth itself. His power was immense, and it showed in the way he could quell the quakes with just a touch. But even Gray looked troubled as the elder explained what was happening. "The balance of the elements has been disrupted," the elder said, pacing before the group of young mages. "It is no coincidence that you four have been affected in your respective regions. The elements are tied to you, and only by working together can you restore the balance." Gray crossed his arms, his brow furrowing. "What caused this?" "There is an ancient force, one we believed had been sealed away long ago. The elemental warden, although being tasked with maintaining the harmony of the elements, has been corrupted. Dark magic has twisted its purpose, and now it seeks to throw the world into chaos." "So, what do we do?" Erin asked, leaning on her staff. "The only way to restore balance is to reclaim the elemental heart," the elder explained. "It is a relic of immense power, capable of controlling the element, but it is now in the hands of the warden deep within the elemental temple. You must journey there, face the warden, and restore the heart. The group exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had ever faced something of this magnitude before. They were powerful in their own right, but this was different. They were being asked to save the world. The journey to the elemental temple was treacherous. The further they traveled, the more unstable the elements became. Storms raged out of nowhere, fires erupted spontaneously, and the ground itself trembled beneath their feet. Each of the mages was pushed to their limits, forced to use their powers in ways they never had before. For Lila, it was a constant struggle to keep the flames at bay. Her natural affinity for fire meant that it obeyed her commands most of the time, but now the flames seemed to have a mind of their own. She could feel the heat building inside her, threatening to consume her if she lost control. Noah, too, was battling the elements. The sea, once his ally, had turned against him. The waves were wild and unpredictable, and he found himself constantly fighting to keep the water in check. He could feel the strain of it, the way the ocean pushed back against him. Erin fared no better. The winds were erratic, pulling her in every direction. She had always loved the freedom of the air, the way it allowed her to soar above the world, but now it felt like a prison. The winds whipped around her, trying to tear her from the sky. And Gray was the most affected of all. The earth, his constant companion, was in turmoil. The ground shifted beneath his feet, cracking and crumbling. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, the responsibility of holding it together. The elemental temple loomed ahead, a colossal structure carved into the side of a mountain. It seemed to pulse with energy, the air around it charged with the force of the element. The closer they got, the stronger the pull. It was as if the temple itself was alive, drawing them in with an invisible hand. Lila could feel the fire inside her stirring, reacting to the raw power emanating from the temple. Her skin tingled with heat, and she clenched her fists, willing herself to stay in control. She glanced at Noah, whose face was set in a grim expression as he focused on keeping the water around him calm. Erin hovered just above the ground, her feet barely touching the earth as the winds carried her forward. Gray walked steadily beside them, his gaze fixed on the temple, his connection to the earth palpable in every step he took. They reached the entrance, a massive stone door etched with ancient runes that glowed faintly in the fading light. The elder had told them the door would open only for those who wielded the element. Without a word, the four of them stepped forward, each raising a hand to the door. As their hands touched the stone, the runes flared to life, and the door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark passageway beyond. The air inside was thick and heavy, oppressive in its stillness. It smelled of damp earth and stagnant water, a sharp contrast to the wild energy outside. The silence pressed in on them as they descended deeper into the temple, the only sound the faint echo of their footsteps on the stone floor. They didn't speak. There was no need to. The weight of their task hung over them like a storm cloud, and each of them knew what was at stake. The world was unraveling, the elements spiraling out of control, and only they could stop it. The passage eventually opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with glowing crystals that bathed the room in a soft, ethereal light. At the center of the chamber stood an altar, and on it, resting in a bed of stone, was the elemental heart. It was a crystalline orb pulsing with the combined power of all four elements, fire, water, wind, and earth, its surface swirling with color. But standing before the altar, guarding the heart, was the elemental warden. The warden was a towering figure, its body seemingly made of the elements themselves. Its form shifted constantly. One moment, it was wreathed in flames. The next, its skin turned to stone. Water flowed through its veins, and wind swirled around its limbs. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a living embodiment of the elemental forces that governed the world. The warden's eyes glowing with a fierce light fixed on the group as they entered the chamber. For a moment, it said nothing, simply regarding them with an unreadable expression. Then it spoke, its voice a deep rumbling echo that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. "You seek to restore the balance," it said, its tone both curious and condescending. "But you are too late. The elements have already begun to consume this world. Soon, there will be nothing left but chaos." "We want to let that happen," Lila said, stepping forward. The fire inside her blazed in response to the warden's challenge, but she kept it under control. "We've come to stop you." The warden's laugh was a low mocking sound. "You think you can stand against me? I am the guardian of the elements. I am their master. You were supposed to protect them, Gray said, his voice steady but firm. But you've corrupted that power. You've let it destroy everything. The warden's eyes narrowed. I've done what is necessary. The elements are not meant to be controlled by mortals. They are wild, untamable, and now they will return to their true state. The balance you seek is an illusion. Without warning, the warden raised its hand, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Fire, water, wind, and earth swirled around them, the elements crashing against each other in a violent storm. The group was thrown back, each of them struggling to regain their footing as the warden's power filled the room. Layla pushed herself up the heat of the flames, scorching her skin. She could feel the fire inside her responding to the chaos, growing stronger, more dangerous. But she couldn't lose control now. She had to focus, had to channel that power. She glanced at Noah, who was already summoning a wall of water to shield them from the flame. Erin was fighting to control the winds, her body buffeted by the gale force winds that tore through the chamber. Gray stood firm, his hands pressed to the ground as he tried to steady the earth beneath their feet. We have to work together, Noah shouted over the roar of the elements. We can try and do this alone. Lila nodded, pushing down the fire that raged within her. She reached out, letting her magic connect with Noah, Swatter, Erin, Swind, and Gray as her. Slowly, their powers began to merge, their individual strengths combining into something greater. The warden watched them, its expression turning from amusement to anger as it realized what they were doing. You think your combined power can defeat me? It snarled, its form shifting as it summoned even more elemental fury. But the four mages stood strong together. Their magic flowed as one, a harmonious blend of fire, water, wind, and earth. They pushed back against the warden's onslaught, their combined strength creating a barrier that shielded them from the chaos. With a final burst of power, they broke through the warden's defenses. The corrupted being staggered, its form flickering as the balance it had so carefully twisted began to unravel. Lila, Noah, Erin, and Gray pressed forward, their magic surging through the chamber, restoring the balance that the warden had destroyed. The warden let out a final agonized cry as its form shattered, dissolving into the elements it had once controlled. The chamber fell silent, the swirling storm of fire, water, wind, and earth fading into nothingness. For a moment, the four mages stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they realized what they had done. The warden was gone. The balance had been restored. The elemental heart pulsed gently on the altar, its surface glowing with the soft, harmonious light of the element. Imla stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out and touched the orb. Warmth spread through her, not the fiery heat of destruction, but the comforting warmth of balance, of harmony. We did it, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Noah placed a hand on her shoulder, his usually calm face showing the faintest hint of a smile. We did. Erin floated down beside them, her eyes wide with amazement. I can't believe it. We actually did it. Gray stood a little apart from the group, his hands still pressed to the ground as he felt the steady pulse of the earth beneath him. It's over, he said quietly, though his voice held a note of something deeper, perhaps understanding, perhaps realization. The world outside the temple had calmed. The fires, the storms, the earthquakes, they were all gone, replaced by the peaceful hum of nature and balance. The four mages stood together, united not just by their power, but by their bond. They had faced the greatest threat their world had ever known, and together they had saved it. As they turned to leave the temple, the elemental heart pulsed once more, a reminder that the elements would always be a part of them. And though the threat had passed for now, they knew that they would forever be the guardians of balance, bound to the elements and to each other.